The gavel slammed down like a death sentence. Evangeline Morrison stood on that wooden platform, her hands trembling as men below shouted numbers like she was livestock. But when Silas Thornfield raised his hand and called out a price that silenced the entire crowd, nobody could have predicted what would happen next. Millbrook County had seen its share of auctions, but nothing like this. The October sun beat down mercilessly on the town square, as Judge Cornelius Webb wiped sweat from his forehead, his voice booming across the gathered crowd. Ava's father had died owing money to half the territory, and now his 19-year-old daughter was paying the price. She kept her eyes fixed on the wooden boards beneath her feet, refusing to meet the hungry stares of the men below. Most of them weren't here for a house servant, and everyone knew it. The whispers had started weeks ago when the judge announced the auction. A young woman, unmarried, with nowhere to go and no family to protect her. Silas Thornfield stood at the back of the crowd, his weathered face unreadable beneath his wide-brimmed hat. At 45, he was one of the most respected ranchers in 3 counties. His wife had died 3 years ago, leaving him alone on a 1,000-acre spread that required more hands than he could afford. But respect didn't make a man immune to loneliness, and the town gossips had been wondering when he'd take another wife. The bidding started low but climbed quickly. Jake Morrison from the saloon called out $15. Old Pete Williams, who already had 2 wives, raised it to $25. The crowd grew restless as the price climbed higher, some men shifting uncomfortably as they realized they were being outbid. That's when Martha Caldwell noticed Silas stepping forward. The woman who ran the boarding house had made it her business to know everyone's affairs, and she'd never seen such a look on the rancher's face. His jaw was set, his eyes focused entirely on the girl standing above them all. When the bidding reached $40, most men started backing away. It was more money than some families saw in 6 months. But Silas raised his hand without hesitation, his voice cutting through the October air like a blade. $50. The crowd fell silent. Judge Webb's eyes widened as he looked down at the rancher. Even Eva looked up for the first time, her green eyes finding Silas among the sea of faces. There was something different about him, something that made her stomach twist with uncertainty rather than the pure terror she'd felt looking at the others. Webb called for higher bids, but no one moved. $50 was a fortune for what most men assumed would be a temporary arrangement. They figured Silas would tire of the girl within a few months, and she'd end up back where she started. The gavel came down with finality, sold to Silas Thornfield. As the crowd began to disperse, Martha Caldwell watched the rancher approach the platform. She'd known Silas since he'd arrived in Millbrook County 20 years ago, had watched him build his ranch from nothing, and mourn his wife's death like his heart had been ripped from his chest. But the way he looked at that girl as he helped her down from the platform made Martha's blood run cold, because in all her years of watching people's secrets unfold, she'd learned to recognize the difference between a man buying property and a man carrying out a plan. And whatever Silas Thornfield was planning, it was about to turn their quiet town upside down. The wagon ride to Silas Thornfield's ranch stretched longer than Eva had imagined possible. She sat rigid beside him, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. Every bump in the dirt road sent waves of panic through her chest, because she still had no idea what this man intended to do with her. Silas hadn't spoken a word since they'd left town. His weathered hands gripped the reins steadily, his eyes fixed on the horizon where his ranch waited like a prison she couldn't escape. Eva stole glances at his profile, searching for some hint of his character, but his face revealed nothing. Behind them, she knew the town was already buzzing with speculation. Martha Caldwell would be holding court at her boarding house, dissecting every detail of the auction for anyone willing to listen. The men who'd been outbid would be drowning their disappointment in whiskey, while their wives whispered about what Silas Thornfield really wanted with a 19-year-old girl. But Eva had learned something about fear in the weeks since her father's death. It wasn't the sharp terror that came all at once and left you gasping. It was the slow, grinding certainty that your life was no longer your own, that every choice had been stripped away before you even knew choices existed. When the ranch house finally came into view, Eva's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the rough cabin she'd expected, but a solid 2-story home with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the afternoon light. Cottonwood trees provided shade around the property, and she could see cattle grazing in pastures that stretched toward distant mountains. It looked like a place where people could be happy. That realization terrified her more than any hovel would have. Silas brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down without a word. Eva remained frozen on the seat, uncertain whether she was supposed to follow or wait for permission. When he turned back to look at her, His expression had softened slightly, but she couldn't read the emotion behind his dark eyes. He offered his hand to help her down, and Eva hesitated before accepting it. His touch was gentle, not possessive like she'd feared, but gentleness could be its own kind of trap, and she'd learned not to trust kindness that came with a price tag. The house felt even larger inside than it had appeared from the road. The main room had a stone fireplace big enough to stand in, and furniture that spoke of comfort rather than survival. But what struck Eva most was how empty it felt, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Silas removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. For the first time since the auction, he looked directly at her, and Eva saw something in his expression that made her stomach lurch with a new kind of fear. Because it wasn't the hungry look she'd expected from the men at the auction. It wasn't desire or possession or even casual interest. It was the look of a man who'd been carrying a burden for so long that it had become part of him. And somehow, she was about to become part of that burden too. But what he said next would shatter every assumption she'd made about why he'd bought her. Silas cleared his throat and gestured toward a chair by the fireplace. His voice, when it finally came, was rougher than Eva had expected, like a man who'd grown unaccustomed to conversation. "You'll have the room upstairs, the one at the end of the hall. It has a lock on the inside." Eva blinked, certain she'd misheard him. A lock on the inside? That made no sense for what she'd assumed he'd bought her for. She remained standing, her body rigid with confusion and suspicion. "I don't understand," she whispered. Silas moved to the mantelpiece, where a faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes watched over the room. He touched the frame gently, and Eva saw his shoulders sag with a grief that seemed to live in his bones. "My wife Sarah died 3 years ago. Cancer took her slow, piece by piece, until there wasn't enough left to fight." His voice cracked slightly. "But before she passed, she made me promise something that I thought was impossible to keep." Eva's heart hammered against her ribs as she waited for him to continue. Outside, the wind picked up, causing the cottonwood trees to whisper against the windows like secrets being shared. "Sarah always wanted a daughter. We tried for years, but the good Lord had other plans. When she was dying, she begged me to find some girl who needed a home, needed a family. Said she couldn't rest easy knowing there were young women out there with nowhere to go, and no one to protect them." The words hit Eva like a physical blow. She stumbled backward until her legs hit the chair, and she collapsed into it without thinking. This wasn't what she'd prepared herself for. Terror, violation, degradation. She'd steeled herself for all of it. But kindness? Protection? It felt like a cruel joke. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice barely audible. Silas turned from the photograph, and Eva saw pain etched in every line of his weathered face. "I know how it looks. A man my age, buying a girl young enough to be his daughter. The whole town's probably making up stories about what goes on out here." "Then why?" The question burst from her lips before she could stop it. "Why buy me like that? Why not just help somehow?" "Because Judge Webb wouldn't have let you go any other way. He's got debts of his own, and auctioning you off was the quickest way to settle your father's estate. If I hadn't bid, you'd be in a much worse situation right now." Eva wanted to believe him. Every instinct in her body craved the safety he was offering. But she'd learned that men's words were cheap, and their promises even cheaper. Her father had promised to provide for her, right up until the day he'd gambled away everything they owned. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice gaining strength. "Nobody does something for nothing." Silas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to his wife's photograph. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of a man who'd been wrestling with impossible choices. "I want to honor my wife's dying wish, and maybe find some peace in doing right by someone who needs it." But even as he spoke those words, the sound of approaching horses reached them through the windows. Multiple riders moving fast toward the house. Eva's blood turned to ice as she recognized the implication. Someone was coming for her, and whatever sanctuary Silas was offering was about to be tested. The riders thundered into the yard like a storm breaking loose. Through the front window, Eva counted 6 men on horseback, led by Deputy Marshal Garrett Boone. Behind him rode some of the same men who'd been at the auction, their faces twisted with alcohol and something uglier than disappointment. Silas moved to the rifle rack beside the door, his movements calm but deliberate. "Stay away from the windows," he told Eva quietly, "and whatever happens, don't let them see you're afraid." Deputy Boone dismounted and approached the porch, his spurs jangling against the wooden steps. Eva had seen him around town before, a man who wore his badge like it gave him permission to take whatever he wanted. Behind him, Jake Morrison from the saloon spat tobacco juice into the dirt, his bloodshot eyes scanning the house. "Thornfield," Boone called out. "We need to talk to you about that girl you bought today." Silas opened the front door, but didn't invite them in. Ava pressed herself against the wall beside the fireplace, close enough to hear but hidden from view. Her heart felt like it might tear itself apart. "What about her, Deputy?" "Well, seems there's been some concerns raised about the legality of that auction. Judge Webb might have overstepped his authority." Boone's voice carried a smugness that made Eva's skin crawl. "We're here to take the girl back to town for proper processing." Eva's breath caught in her throat. She knew that was a lie. Whatever processing they had in mind wouldn't happen in any courthouse. "The auction was legal and recorded," Silas replied, his voice steady. "The girl's debt was settled fairly." "Maybe so," Jake Morrison called out from behind Boone. "But a man your age keeping a young girl like that doesn't look right to decent folks. Might be we need to check on her welfare. Make sure she's being treated proper." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Eva closed her eyes, feeling the trap closing around her all over again. She'd thought Silas might be different, but how could one man stand against six? And why would he even try? "You boys can ride back to town now," Silas said, his tone growing colder. "The girl stays here." Boone laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I don't think you understand the situation, Thornfield. We're not asking permission." That's when Eva heard the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. Through the window, she saw Silas step fully onto the porch, his weapon held ready but not yet aimed. "And I don't think you understand mine," Silas replied. "This is my property and the girl is under my protection. You want to take her, you'll need a warrant signed by a federal judge, not some trumped-up excuse about welfare checks." The tension in the yard was thick enough to cut. Ava realized she was holding her breath, caught between terror and something that might have been hope. No one had ever stood up for her before. Not her father, not the law, not anyone. If you were Eva, what would you do? Trust that Silas could protect you and stay hidden, or reveal yourself to prevent bloodshed that might get him killed? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which choice you'd make, because what Eva decided in that moment would determine whether she lived to see another sunrise. Deputy Boone's hand moved toward his gun, and Eva knew that whatever choice she made, someone was about to pay a price that couldn't be undone. Eva stepped into the doorway before she could stop herself. The sight of her brought an immediate hush to the yard, 6 pairs of eyes turning toward her like wolves spotting prey. But instead of the fear they expected to see, she lifted her chin and spoke with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "I'm staying here willingly. Mr. Thornfield has treated me with nothing but respect." Deputy Boone's face darkened. "Girl, you don't know what's good for you. A man like Thornfield has appetites that—" "Deputy Boone!" Silas's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You're on my land, threatening my family. I suggest you reconsider your next words very carefully. Family." The word hit Eva like a physical blow, but not an unpleasant one. When had anyone ever called her family? Jake Morrison spat again, his hand hovering near his gun. "This is ridiculous. Thornfield, you can't just buy yourself a wife and expect—" "She's not my wife." Silas's response was calm but firm. "She's under my protection as my ward. Legal and proper, witnessed by the whole town." But even as he spoke, Eva could see the calculation in Boone's eyes. 6 armed men against one, even if that one was Silas Thornfield. The deputy was weighing his chances, and Eva realized with growing horror that he liked his odds. That's when the sound of additional horses reached them from the main road. Eva's heart sank, thinking more of Boone's men were arriving. But Silas's posture straightened with something that might have been relief. Sheriff Marcus Wade rode into the yard with 2 of his deputies, his weathered face taking in the scene with the sharp eyes of a man who'd seen trouble brewing from miles away. Wade was one of the few lawmen in the territory who couldn't be bought, which made him both respected and dangerous. "Deputy Boone," Wade said, his voice carrying the authority that came from 30 years of keeping the peace. "Might I ask what brings you to Mr. Thornfield's ranch with an armed posse?" Boone's swagger faltered slightly. "Sheriff Wade, we were just checking on the welfare of the girl, making sure everything's legal and above board." Wade's eyes moved to Eva, and she saw something in his expression that told her he understood exactly what kind of welfare check this was meant to be. "Miss, are you here against your will?" "No, sir," Eva replied, her voice gaining strength. "Mr. Thornfield has given me a home and asked for nothing improper in return." The sheriff nodded slowly, then turned his attention back to Boone. Then I believe your business here is concluded, Deputy. Unless you have a warrant I haven't seen. Now see here. Wade. No, you see here. Wade's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You're harassing a citizen on his own property without cause. I suggest you and your men head back to town before I decide to investigate what's really going on. The threat was unmistakable. Boone's face flushed red, but he knew better than to challenge Sheriff Wade directly. After a long moment, he remounted his horse, his eyes burning with a hatred that promised this wasn't over. This ain't finished, Thornfield, he said as he wheeled his horse around. Girl like that, she'll bring you nothing but trouble. As the riders disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust, Eva felt her knees go weak with relief. But Sheriff Wade dismounted and approached the porch, his expression grave. Mr. Thornfield, Miss Morrison, he said, tipping his hat. I'm afraid Deputy Boone might be right about one thing. This situation is going to bring you more trouble than you bargained for. And with those words, Eva realized their problems had only just begun. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button, because what Sheriff Wade revealed next would change everything they thought they knew about Eva's past. What the sheriff had discovered about Eva's father would turn their quiet sanctuary into the most dangerous place in the territory. Sheriff Wade accepted Silas's invitation for coffee, but his weathered hands trembled slightly as he lifted the cup. Eva noticed the tremor and felt her stomach drop. Whatever news he carried was bad enough to shake a man who'd faced down outlaws and Indian raids without flinching. Miss Morrison, Wade began carefully, what do you know about your father's business dealings in the months before he died? Eva frowned, searching her memory. He said he was investing in cattle, said we'd be rich soon, that he'd found a way to make back everything we'd lost. The words felt hollow now, like echoes of a dream she'd been fool enough to believe. Wade and Silas exchanged a look that made Eva's blood run cold. Sheriff, Silas said quietly, just tell us. Your father wasn't investing in cattle. Miss Morrison, he was moving stolen gold for the Carmichael gang. The words hit Eva like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling over. The Carmichael gang was legend in 3 territories, ruthless killers who'd robbed banks and trains from Colorado to California. Their leader, Black Pete Carmichael, had a bounty on his head that would make a man rich for life. That's impossible, Eva whispered. My father was a gambler, not a criminal. I'm afraid it gets worse, Wade continued, his voice heavy with sympathy. The gold your father was transporting for them. It disappeared the day before he died. $30,000 in gold bars. Gone without a trace. Silas leaned forward, his face grave. You're saying the Carmichael gang thinks Eva knows where it is. I'm saying they're sure of it. My sources tell me Black Pete himself is riding this way with a dozen men. They think Miss Morrison's father told her where he hid the gold before he died. Eva felt the room spinning around her. But he didn't tell me anything. He died in his sleep. I never even got to say goodbye. That won't matter to the Carmichael gang, Wade said grimly. They've killed entire families for less than $30,000. And now that word's spread about the auction, they know exactly where to find you. The sheriff turned to Silas, his expression deadly serious. Thornfield, you need to understand what you've gotten yourself into. These aren't small-time rustlers or drunken cowboys. Black Pete Carmichael once burned down an entire town because the sheriff there looked at him wrong. If they think Eva has their gold, they'll tear this place apart board by board, Silas finished quietly. Eva stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. Then I'll leave. I won't bring this down on you, not after what you've done for me. Sit down, Silas said firmly. You're not going anywhere. You don't understand. Eva's voice cracked with desperation. These men will kill you. They'll burn your house, destroy everything you've built. I won't be responsible for that. Silas stood and moved to the window, looking out at the ranch he'd spent 20 years building. When he turned back to face them, his eyes held a determination that reminded Eva why men respected him from here to Denver. Sheriff, how long do we have? My sources say they're 2 days out. Maybe 3 if they stop to rest their horses. Then we have time to prepare. Silas moved to a cabinet and pulled out a box Eva hadn't noticed before. Inside were more ammunition and weapons than she'd ever seen in one place. This ranch has been attacked before. Apache raids, cattle thieves, claim jumpers. It's still standing because I learned how to defend it. Wade shook his head. Silas, this is different. The Carmichael gang isn't some raiding party you can scare off with a few warning shots. They're killers, and they won't stop until they get what they want. Then maybe it's time they learned that some things are worth dying for, Silas replied quietly. Eva felt tears burning her eyes as she realized what he was saying. This man, who barely knew her, was willing to risk everything to protect her. But as she looked at the determination in his face, she also saw something else that made her blood freeze, because hidden in that box of weapons was something that didn't belong. A leather pouch that looked exactly like the one her father used to carry. And if Sheriff Wade was right about the missing gold, that pouch might hold the key to keeping them all alive. But touching it would mean betraying the one man who'd ever tried to protect her. Eva waited until both men had gone outside to check the perimeter before she approached the weapon box. Her hands shook as she lifted the leather pouch, and the weight of it confirmed her worst fears. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were 3 gold bars that caught the lamplight like trapped sunfire. Her father had hidden the stolen gold in Silas's house. The man who'd shown her nothing but kindness was harboring evidence that could see him hanged, and he didn't even know it. The sound of boots on the porch sent Eva scrambling to hide the pouch back where she'd found it. Silas entered alone, his face grim with the weight of preparation. He'd spent the last hour positioning rifles at strategic windows and checking ammunition supplies. "Sheriff Wade's riding back to town to gather more men," Silas said, not noticing Eva's guilty expression. "He'll be back by dawn with whatever help he can muster." Eva nodded, not trusting her voice. The gold felt like it was burning a hole through the wooden box, demanding to be acknowledged. Every second she stayed silent was another second she was deceiving the only person who'd ever protected her. "Silas," she began, then stopped. How could she tell him? How could she destroy the fragile safety they'd built by revealing that her father had made him an accessory to theft and murder? "What is it?" His dark eyes studied her face with concern. Before Eva could answer, the distant sound of gunfire echoed across the valley. Both of them froze, listening as the shots continued, not random hunting fire, but the deliberate rhythm of an attack. Silas grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. "That's coming from the Morrison place," he said grimly. "Your old homestead." Eva's blood turned to ice. The Carmichael gang wasn't waiting for dawn. They were already here, tearing apart her family's abandoned property, looking for the gold that was sitting 20 feet away from where she stood. "They'll come here next," Silas said, checking his ammunition. "Eva, I need you to get upstairs and barricade yourself in that room I showed you. No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "No." The word came out stronger than Eva had intended. "I won't hide while you fight my battles. This isn't about fighting your battles. This is about keeping you alive long enough to have battles worth fighting." More gunfire erupted, closer this time. Through the window, Eva could see orange flames beginning to lick at the horizon where her childhood home was burning. The Carmichael gang was destroying everything in their path, and they were moving systematically toward the Thornfield Ranch. That's when Eva made a decision that would either save them both or destroy them completely. She moved to the weapon box and pulled out the leather pouch, her hands steady now with desperate determination. "Silas, there's something you need to know about why they're really here." He turned from the window, his eyes widening as he saw what she held. The gold bars caught the lamplight, revealing the terrible truth that had been hidden in his own home. "Your father," Silas said quietly, understanding flooding his features. "He hid it here before he died. I just found it." Eva's voice cracked with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I never knew. I swear I never knew." The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and through the window they could see torches moving through the darkness like fallen stars. Black Pete Carmichael and his gang were coming, and they would kill everyone on this ranch to get what Eva now held in her trembling hands. Silas looked at the gold, then at Eva, then at the approaching lights that promised death and destruction, and what he decided in that moment would determine whether either of them lived to see another sunrise. Silas took the pouch from Eva's hands without a word of accusation, his calloused fingers testing the weight of the gold that had brought death to their doorstep. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats grew thunderous as Black Pete Carmichael's gang surrounded the house like wolves circling wounded prey. "Eva," Silas said quietly, "do you trust me?" She looked into his weathered face and saw not anger or betrayal, but the same protective determination that had driven him to bid $50 for a stranger's freedom. "With my life." "Then follow my lead, and whatever happens, don't let them see you're afraid." The front door exploded inward under the force of a rifle butt, and Black Pete Carmichael stepped into the house like death itself had come calling. He was smaller than Eva had imagined, but his eyes held a coldness that made her soul recoil. Behind him came 6 of the most dangerous men she'd ever seen, their guns drawn and ready. "Well, well," Black Pete said, his voice soft and deadly. "Silas Thornfield, I heard you bought yourself a pretty little thing at auction today. Carmichael." Silas kept his rifle lowered but ready. "You're not welcome on my land. Welcome's got nothing to do with it. I'm here for what belongs to me." Black Pete's eyes found Eva and lingered with hungry malice. "That girl's daddy stole something precious, and I aim to get it back." Eva stepped forward before Silas could stop her, the gold pouch clutched in her hands. "Is this what you want?" The effect was immediate. Every gun in the room swung toward her, but Black Pete held up a hand to stop his men from firing. His eyes locked onto the leather pouch with the intensity of a starving man seeing food. "Smart girl. Now hand it over nice and slow, and maybe we'll make your deaths quick." "No," Eva said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. "I'll give you the gold, but only if you give me your word that you'll leave Mr. Thornfield alone. He's innocent in all this." Black Pete laughed, a sound like grinding bone. "Innocent? Girl, nobody's innocent in this world. Your daddy learned that the hard way." That's when Silas spoke, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd faced death before and found it wanting. "Carmichael, you've got what you came for. Take it and go." "See? That's where you're wrong, Thornfield. I didn't just come for the gold. I came to send a message about what happens to people who cross the Carmichael gang." Eva felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. These men hadn't just come to retrieve stolen property. They'd come to make an example that would be whispered about in saloons from here to California. And suddenly she understood that her father's theft had doomed everyone she cared about. But before Black Pete could give the order to fire, Sheriff Wade's voice cut through the tension like salvation itself. "Black Pete Carmichael, you're surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Through the windows, Eva could see torches surrounding the house. Wade had returned with what looked like half the territory's lawmen, and the tables had suddenly turned. Black Pete's face twisted with rage as he realized he'd walked into a trap. But cornered animals were the most dangerous, and Eva saw his finger tighten on his gun's trigger. That's when Silas made his move. The explosion of gunfire shattered the night, and when the smoke cleared, Black Pete Carmichael lay dead on the floor of the house that had become Eva's sanctuary. His gang surrendered without their leader, and the gold that had cost so many lives was finally returned to its rightful owners. 3 months later, Eva Morrison became Eva Thornfield in a ceremony that brought the whole county to celebrate. As she stood beside the man who'd bought her freedom and given her a family, she realized that sometimes the worst moments in life were just the beginning of the best ones. The ranch that had been built on hard work and defended with courage became a home built on love and protected by the unbreakable bond between 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances. And in the town of Millbrook County, they still tell the story of the farmer who bought a girl at auction and gave her something more valuable than gold, a chance to choose her own destiny. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video now.